Hey guys, and welcome to this week's Movement Debriefed video series. Today's going to be a little bit different. We're not using the Coach's Eye app. I got a great comment on our last video that's linked up in the description of this one, so you can check it out on lateral movement and foot placement. But anyway, I got a great comment from Kevin Stanowick on, I think I'm saying that right, I hope I am, on LinkedIn, and he had some great questions, and you know, they were too good of questions to address just in a quick post, so I wanted to have this follow-up video so we can address some of those things. I think lateral movement is a really challenging thing, and there's certain aspects that I believe make effective lateral movement and can help us kind of guide our training. So I'm going to read his question, and I'm going to kind of address the pieces one by one here. So first off, he says, I think form for this exercise depends on what you're training for and your ability level. That is always 100% true. We always like to try and give rules in terms of what good movement looks like, but the best answer to any question is, it depends, right? The situations are different, people move differently, so you know, we're always looking to provide a filter that we can judge good movement through, but we never want to be so hard and fast to these rules because there's always exceptions and there's always good things that are going to be different. So when we're looking at training good movement, we really just want to focus on, can we set good foundations? And for anything that we're going to do, that is always the basis. So he goes on to say, I found that several lead a lateral lunge with an externally rotated leg and pointed toe out to provide direction in the step and cushion foot impact. Those are both very true. Now again, they're not wrong. There's certain instances that can be okay, but the way I'm generally looking at it, if someone is doing that, it shows a potential movement dysfunction for me. So I don't necessarily want to use the active tissue in the ankle and the lower leg to absorb force. I want to be able to use more of the passive tissue, and I can do that better if the foot is in dorsiflexion. Plus, I know that the hip is going to be much better at absorbing force than the ankle ever will be. So the better I can stabilize the ankle, the more I can start to transfer force to the hip, so now I can use the hip for deceleration. As far as direction, of course there's instances where sometimes I want direction in lateral movement. However, most of the time for lateral movement, I don't want to commit to a direction. For me, lateral movement is all about reactivity. It's moving right in order to be able to move left. Because think about it, if I wanted to go point A to point B, I would just sprint. That's the fastest way to get there. So I backpedal or I shuffle or move laterally when I need to keep a reactive component to my movement. So I don't want to commit to a direction because I always want to be able to change my mind and start to move back the other way, which is why I like that toe forward, because I can move right, load right, but be ready to move left. So he says, is it okay if we put it on the toe when we make floor contact and move into dorsiflexion and then loading the heel after the step? And I think that we just kind of addressed that when we're talking about there. What about performing them with the stepping leg remaining and the toes heel off the ground? Athletically, we need to be able to move laterally while on our toes. So why not train that way in addition to explosive training at the hip? So true, right? But we actually don't want to be on the toes. We want to be on the ball of the foot. And there's a huge difference. We have a lot better structure and a lot better contact, better base of support on the ball of the foot than we do on the toes. Plus, if I'm on the toes, that tends to put me into dorsiflexion. Dorsiflexion is a very unstable position for the ankle. So if I can keep, plantar flexion. If I can keep more into a dorsiflexion, which is more on the ball of the foot, I can keep a very steady, stable ankle. I can use the passive tissues to store and release energy without having to work for it. Plus, I can transfer more force to the hips. So I'm a huge component of not overexerting the ankle, staying on the ball of the foot with just a very little bit elevated on the heel, so we're as stable as possible through the ankle. He also talks about so many push-off with the calves in an explosive return anyway, and that is very true, but if we're looking at triple flexion, we know that it drives and stems from the hip. So if I'm loaded, triple extension, if I'm loaded into triple flexion, so I'm flexed in the hips, the knees, and the ankles, and I have all this energy stored, my initial driver is through the hip. The hip is where the energy, the power comes from, and then I finish extending through the knee and extending through the toe as that final push-off. So it all has to happen in sequence. I'm never going to have as much power in the ankle as I would in the hip. So as long as the hip is driving the movement, yeah, I definitely want to see extension through the ankle and through the foot. That's a part of the important movement, but the whole point that I tried to make on the video is let's look at how can we load the hip and put the body in the best position to be successful. I love his last bit on this comment, this question. At what point do we train anatomy, safety, and progressions versus functionality and natural tendencies? And the great part is I think that there's so much intermixing and intermingling through there. But always first. Always first. We always start with the basics. We always start with foundations. We always establish good movement before we start to challenge movement. So, and it's a choice, right? It's a choice for every trainer, and it's a choice for every person participating in our workouts. But the way I look at it is, I know that if my car is out of alignment, that if I drive on it, it's going to cause problems. And I know the faster and the harder I drive that car, the more problems it's going to have. So we have to know that as trainers, and people have to know that as clients, that, hey, if you want to make sure that you're able to race and you're able to perform at a high level, we want to take care of these things first. So for me, all those things happen first. And it's so, so, so important that we get people moving well before we get them moving off. And Greg Cook talks about that all the time with his FMS stuff, and I couldn't agree more. So Kevin, thank you so much. Your comments, your questions were absolutely amazing, and I hope this answered some of those questions, and I hope you guys enjoyed checking this out. Make sure to check us back for a couple weeks for another Movement Debriefed video.